Okay, so let's talk about something that, look, this is going to sound harsh, but I promise it's not political. It's history, right? Jimmy Carter and Herbert Hoover, two of the most genuinely decent human beings to ever sit in the Oval Office. Like, I'm talking Boy Scout level good people. And both of them absolutely struggled as presidents. And here's the thing that really gets me about this. We want to believe that being a good person automatically makes you good at the job. That if you have the right morals, the right intentions, the right heart, everything else just falls into place.
But it doesn't, and these two guys prove it in the most painful way possible. Let me start with Carter because, okay, full disclosure, the guy's basically a saint now. He passed at an overripe old age of 100. He built houses for Habitat for Humanity into his 90s, taught Sunday school for like 70 years, won the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, come on, you can't not respect the man. But as president, from 1977 to 1981, it was rough. And I say that with all the respect in the world, but let's be honest about what happened. You see, the problem was that he wouldn't play the game. Carter ran as an outsider. He wasn't part of the Washington establishment. He was a peanut farmer from Georgia, a nuclear engineer, a governor who promised to bring honesty back to the White House after Watergate. And people loved that about him. They ate it up. But then he got to Washington and he just refused to schmooze. He wouldn't play politics with Congress. He treated them like they should just do the right thing because it was the right thing, you know? Which is, that's admirable. That's genuinely admirable. But it's also incredibly naive. You know what Congress did? They ignored him. His own party, the Democrats, who controlled both houses of Congress, just didn't work with him because he wouldn't butter them up, wouldn't make deals, wouldn't invite them to the White House for drinks and backslapping. He thought the presidency was about policy, not politics. And technically, he was right, but practically, he was dead wrong. Then there was the Iran hostage crisis. 52 Americans taken hostage at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, held for 444 days. And Carter he couldn't get them out. He tried negotiations. He tried a military rescue that failed catastrophically. 8 American servicemen died in the desert when helicopters crashed. It was a disaster. And the worst part is that Carter was actually trying to do the right thing. He didn't want to start a war. He didn't want to carpet bomb Iran. He was trying to bring people home safely. But every single night, the news showed day 237 of the hostage crisis or whatever. It just kept counting up. And Americans watching at home saw a president who looked weak, who looked like he couldn't protect American citizens. Was that fair? No, probably not, but perception became reality.
Another problem was the economy. Oh, God, the economy. And if that wasn't enough, the economy was falling apart. Inflation was hitting like 13%. 13%! Gas lines around the block because of the energy crisis. Interest rates went over 20% at one point. 20%! Now, to be fair, and I need to say this, a lot of this wasn't Carter's fault. He inherited an economy that was already struggling from the 1970s oil shocks. But you know what he did? He went on TV and gave this speech that people called the malaise speech, even though he never said the word malaise. He basically told America, we have a crisis of confidence. We're too materialistic. We need to lower our expectations. And he wasn't wrong. He was actually probably right about a lot of it. But you can't tell Americans to lower their expectations and expect to get reelected. You just can't. Ronald Reagan came along and said, it's morning in America again. We're going to be great. And people went, yeah, we'll take that guy. Why did President Carter fail, even though he was right? Here's my theory, and I know this sounds like armchair psychology or whatever, but Carter was an engineer. He believed in studying problems, finding the best solution, and implementing it. He thought if you showed people the data, the right answer, they'd just agree. But politics doesn't work like that. Politics is about narratives, about making people feel things, about compromise and coalition building, and sometimes lying a little bit to keep everyone happy. Carter couldn't do that. He was too honest, too rigid, too unwilling to bend. He passed some genuinely important stuff. The Department of Energy, the Department of Education, the Camp David Accords that brought peace between Israel and Egypt. That last one especially, that's huge. That's still holding up today. But none of that mattered because people felt like things were getting worse under his watch, and feeling beats policy every single time. Okay, now let's go back a bit. Herbert Hoover, president from 1929 to 1933. And before you ask, yes, that Herbert Hoover, the guy who was president when the Great Depression hit. But here's what most people don't know. Before he became president, Hoover was probably the most accomplished humanitarian of his era. Like, it's not even close. Hoover was a self-made millionaire, mining engineer who made his fortune by his 40s. But then he dedicated his life to helping people. During World War I, he organized food relief for Belgium. Belgium was occupied by Germany, and millions of people were starving. Hoover, who wasn't even in government at the time, put together this massive operation that fed 9 million Belgians. 9 million! Then he ran food relief for all of Europe after the war ended. He probably saved more lives than any other American civilian in the 20th century. I'm not exaggerating. The guy was a hero.
He served as Secretary of Commerce in the 1920s and was really good at it. Efficient, organized, forward-thinking. When he ran for president in 1928, he won in a landslide. People loved him. And then October 1929 happened. The stock market crashed, and then it got worse, and then it got worse, and then it kept getting worse for 3 straight years. By 1932, unemployment was at 25%. 25%. 1 in 4 Americans couldn't find work. Banks were failing by the thousands. People were losing their homes, their farms, their life savings. And Hoover, he tried. He actually tried a lot of things that people don't give him credit for. He increased public works spending. He tried to get businesses to keep wages up. He created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to loan money to struggling banks and businesses. But it wasn't enough, and more importantly, he couldn't bring himself to do more.
Hoover believed, deeply, genuinely believed in something called rugged individualism. The idea that Americans should pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that direct government handouts would destroy people's character and self-reliance. He thought the Depression would fix itself if everyone just worked harder and had faith in the American system. He kept saying prosperity was just around the corner. It wasn't. And when World War I veterans marched on Washington in 1932 asking for early payment of their bonuses because they were starving, you know what Hoover did? He sent in the army. General Douglas MacArthur, with tanks and tear gas, drove them out of Washington and burned their camps. The optics were catastrophic. The president who had once fed millions of starving Europeans was now sicking the military on starving American veterans. The thing about Hoover is, and this is what kills me about his story, he genuinely cared about people. His whole life was about helping people. But he was trapped by his ideology. He couldn't bring himself to use the full power of the federal government to provide direct relief because he thought it would make people dependent, that it would undermine American values. He was so worried about doing the wrong thing that he couldn't do enough of the right thing. And Americans were suffering. They didn't care about philosophical debates about the role of government. They needed food. They needed jobs. They needed hope.
Franklin Roosevelt came along and said, "I'll try anything. We'll experiment until something works." And people went,
Finally, someone who's actually going to do something. Hoover lost the 1932 election in one of the biggest landslides in American history. He won 6 states. 6. Here's the really sad part. After he left office, Hoover lived for another 31 years. And you know what he did? He went back to humanitarian work. He organized food relief for Europe after World War II. He served on government commissions. He wrote books. He helped people. And by the time he died in 1964, a lot of people had come around to respecting him again. They realized he was a fundamentally decent man who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong philosophy. But that doesn't change what happened when he was president. So here's what these 2 stories tell us. Being a good person is not the same thing as being a good leader. Leadership, especially presidential leadership, requires things that don't always align with being genuinely decent. Compromise, even when you think you're right. Political theater, even when you'd rather just focus on policy. Flexibility, even when you have strong principles. Ruthlessness, even when you want to be kind. Optimism, even when you see all the problems clearly. Carter and Hoover were both too honest, too principled, too rigid in their thinking. They couldn't adapt. They couldn't play the game. They couldn't give people what they needed emotionally while they worked on the practical solutions. And that's not a moral failing. It's just a mismatch between who they were and what the job required. Does this mean we should want presidents who are willing to lie, to manipulate, to sacrifice their principles for political advantage? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But I do know this. Some of our most effective presidents weren't necessarily our most moral ones. LBJ was by most accounts kind of a terrible person in his personal behavior, but he got the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act passed. FDR probably knew about Pearl Harbor before it happened, or at least that's debated, but he led us through World War II and the Depression. Meanwhile, Carter and Hoover, 2 of the most genuinely good human beings to hold the office, struggled to accomplish their goals. What does that say about power, about politics, about what we should want in our leaders? I'm not sure, but it's uncomfortable to think about.